There's also some hopeful news in the search for a vaccine, and we'll have the latest on British Prime Minister Boris Johnson, still in intensive care tonight.
Thank you.
You'll meet frontline heroes, including a nurse risking her life to save others. We'll remember some of the lives lost to this pandemic. In collaboration with Facebook, we'll be answering your questions with a panel of experts. And we'll talk to New York Mayor Bill de Blasio. This country, this generation, is being put to a test comparable to great challenges of the past. Pearl Harbor, 9/11, and the worst still lies ahead. Tonight, the nation and the world continue to reel under the onslaught of the pandemic. Michigan and Louisiana are especially hard hit, and the number of cases in Florida is surging. But the New York, New Jersey metropolitan area remains the epicenter. Today, New York reported its biggest increase in deaths so far, but hospitalizations are down. Governor Andrew Cuomo.
To the extent we see a flattening or a possible plateau, that's because of what we are doing, and we have to keep doing it.
Tonight, the New York Police Department reported nearly 20% of its force has called out sick, and that more than 2,000 uniformed officers have tested positive for the virus. New York's Cathedral of St. John the Divine will host a new field hospital, adding to the extra hospital beds in Central Park. NBC's Craig Melvin.
What's striking about what's happening here in Central Park is you have people who are still enjoying the park, still riding their bikes, living their lives. And then a few feet away, you have people fighting for their lives.
In Brooklyn and in hard-hit areas nationwide, funeral homes are at the breaking point. NBC's Rahema Ellis says funeral directors are the last responders who see firsthand that the victims are not just numbers, but human beings.
And their family members and their people who loved someone and who had someone love them. And we can never forget that.
Beyond the toll in lives, the toll on jobs and the economy is unprecedented and frightening. At least 10 million jobs have already been lost in just the last few weeks.
The latest on the pandemic numbers.
CNBC anchor and New York Times columnist Andrew Ross Sorkin.
I don't want to sugarcoat things. This could very well be a Great Depression-style disaster. I hope it isn't. I think a lot of it is really dependent on how quickly we're able to contain this virus, how quickly we're able to get people back to work.
The economy might not be back to normal anytime soon. The damage could take months and months to repair. And as we're all advised to stay home, Wisconsin went ahead and held its primary today. Voters crowded polls for in-person voting after the state's Democratic governor was overruled in his attempt to delay the election. Meanwhile, the faithful are marking Holy Week in new and resourceful ways. At many churches this past Sunday, drive-by communion and palms.
Stay safe.
Reverend Chip Lowe of the First Presbyterian Church in Yorktown, New York.
In the midst of this isolating time, we want people to know that the church is still open. It's just open in a different way.
Tomorrow night marks the start of Passover. Jewish families normally gather at Seder, where the youngest at the table usually asks, why is this night different from all other nights? This Passover will be very different, and many families will rely on video conferencing. Rabbi Rachel Weiss of Evanston, Illinois.
The connections in our congregation have gotten even stronger. People are reaching out, people are helping each other, people are learning to bake challah together over Zoom.
And tonight, an update on one family we've been following in the vortex of this crisis. Pandemic expert Dr. Erwin Redlener is an NBC News analyst.
Michael Redlener, our son who's an emergency room physician, had this incredibly ironic situation of admitting our older son, his older brother, David.
David was diagnosed with coronavirus. This week, thankfully, he was released and is self-isolating.
Knock on wood, I seem to be coming through this process unscathed.
Dr. Michael Redlener.
This disease is like Russian roulette. It's really, we don't know who's going to be impacted in a serious way.
Being mayor of New York has long been called the second toughest job in America. With this city now at the epicenter of a global pandemic, the job has gotten even tougher. The city has been hit with well over 76,000 cases of coronavirus, about 1 of every 5 U.S. cases, and a heartbreaking 4,000 plus deaths. I spoke to New York Mayor Bill de Blasio about all this just a short time ago.
Today's a somber day in New York City because we're talking about 4,000 people who have passed away. That's more than we lost on 9/11. I mean, just to give you a sense of the sheer tragic scale of this. And it's only happened in a matter of weeks. So we're reeling, but the truth is, I'm sure we've lost people who we don't even yet know it was because of the coronavirus. People who died at home, or people who died earlier on before this even had been fully understood. So this tells you how serious, how ferocious this disease is. And it's another reminder, don't let up. Don't for a moment think that when you see some progress, it's a reason to break from the actual strategies that have been working. In fact, it says we've got to double down on the kind of discipline that New Yorkers have shown. If we want to get through this, we're going to have to even go farther into the social distancing and the shelter in place to ensure we really beat this back.
What are you doing about a second wave? And you kind of alluded to that a moment ago, this notion that we may see it swing back on us. Are you already preparing for that moment?
Lester, yeah, because what we saw in Asia was some instances where there was a resurgence. And the best way to avoid that is to stick to the strategy. But we know that we have to be ready for the possibility of resurgence. So right now, up until this week, it was literally hand to mouth. Would we have enough ventilators? Would we have enough doctors and nurses where we needed them in time to keep people alive? If we get any respite, it's a time to lay in the resources to prepare for potentially another onslaught, not to get overconfident, because unfortunately there's evidence that that can happen. The best way to stop that is by sticking to the strategy. But this is a disease that no one fully understands. Literally no one on earth fully understands the nature of this disease. Yeah. And we have to take it seriously.
I want to share a question that came in from Amy on Facebook. How can we have an accurate picture of the COVID-19 infection rate when so few are actually being tested? So are you operating without the full picture?
Of course. I mean, Lester, the big story here is we did not, as a city, certainly as a nation, have the testing we needed early. That would have given us an entirely different strategic opportunity to beat this back. I pray that one day there will be universal testing in this country. That will be a game changer. But no, of course we don't have the full picture. And there's a huge percentage of people who are infected already don't even know it. Thankfully, most of them get through it pretty well, pretty mildly. But no, this is even bigger than we realize. That's the truth. I expect more than half of all New Yorkers will eventually get infected.
Now, one of the set of numbers we're seeing, not only here in New York, but in Detroit and Chicago, is this is disproportionately affecting the communities of color and specifically black people. Do you have a handle on that, quantify a number on that here in New York, or why that is?
Yeah, Lester, there's no question there's a disparity here. It's real. We're seeing more and more that this disease is hitting communities that were already suffering from serious health disparities, communities that did not have their fair share of health care already. In a country where clearly we're having a huge national debate about the need to make healthcare universal, this crisis has put a point on that, because for the many communities that didn't have access to healthcare, couldn't afford healthcare, this disease is hitting them real hard. We're losing a lot of people, particularly older people, in lower income communities, in communities of color. We're putting out more and more data all the time, but we're pretty certain that there's a stark disparity to this disease.
I have to ask you one more question. I look outside and almost everybody I see, at least in my neighborhood, is wearing a mask. And I wonder to myself, what if that call had come 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, a month ago to wear a cloth mask? Do you ponder that same question?
Oh, Lester, we're all going to be pondering the what ifs here, but the focus right now has to be on saving lives and getting ahead of this. We know for sure in the last few days, the scientific evidence became clear, and this was recognized around the world, that there was finally hard evidence that face coverings made a difference. And it's really to protect other people. It's an altruistic act to reduce the community spread. So I think we're going to ask ourselves a lot of questions. I think the biggest question we're going to ask when this is over is, why wasn't there testing, and what it would have meant if we had testing from the beginning? And to any city that hasn't gone through this, Lester, here's my message to the people of cities all over America. Do not resist when you hear about shelter-in-place, social distancing. If you try and put off those ideas, it's going to lead to a bigger crisis, and it's going to lead to hospitals that just can't handle the burden. It's actually by embracing those tough measures that you keep your healthcare system alive and you can save lives. So we know what works. We've now got to be devoted to it.
All right. Well, Mr. Mayor, thank you for being with us. A lot of people are counting on you, but you know that. I appreciate you taking the time and being with us tonight.
Thank you, Lester.
We got another reminder this week that this virus knows no boundaries as to who and where it will strike. The Prime Minister of Great Britain, Boris Johnson, is among the highest profile politicians to be stricken. Johnson faced some criticism for his slow response to the outbreak. Now he's fighting for his life in a London hospital. Our chief foreign correspondent, Richard Engel, has the latest from London.
Lester, Prime Minister Boris Johnson is spending another night in an ICU here. Officials say he's stable, in good spirits, as this country is bracing for tough times to come. The United Kingdom is now getting hit hard. The death toll spiked today. 786 new COVID-19 deaths, the highest single-day increase. Prime Minister Boris Johnson, officials say, is on oxygen, but breathing on his own. Not on a ventilator, but moved to intensive care in case he needs one. He's deputized the Foreign Secretary to take charge when needed, although he doesn't have full authority to make policy decisions.
And I'm confident he'll pull through. Because if there's one thing I know about this Prime Minister, he's a fighter. And he'll be back at the helm, leading us through this crisis in short order.
Boris Johnson, a close ally of President Trump, was initially skeptical about the outbreak, didn't want to shut down the economy or even practice social distancing himself.
I'm shaking hands continuously. I was at a hospital the other night where I think there were actually a few coronavirus patients, and I shook hands with everybody. You'll be pleased to know, and I continue to shake hands.
But nearly 2 weeks ago, Johnson got the virus and put out this video message trying to assure the public.
I've developed mild symptoms of the coronavirus.
But he looked unwell.
You looked dreadful at that time.
Guito Harry was his press secretary when Johnson was London mayor.
But there are two things that Boris Johnson, just by character and by recognition of the role, would have been adamant that he had to do: make the big judgment calls and be seen to be leading the country by example through this. And that was something that was virtually impossible to get him to give up until he was literally sent into intensive care.
Johnson's pregnant fiancée also developed COVID-19 symptoms, along with several members of the government, including the health secretary. Anthony Costello is a British public health expert.
You've seen our British Parliament. We're all crammed in. March the 11th, we already knew that one of the junior ministers had become infected 2 weeks earlier, yet they went ahead with the budget.
Did the UK get this wrong, just like critics say the Trump administration has been getting this wrong?
Yes, I do think that. I think they have got it wrong.
With familiar echoes to the United States, the United Kingdom also never managed testing on a wide scale, despite repeated promises that more tests were in the pipeline.
Are these tests ever going to materialise?
What is the testing strategy for care homes and prisons?
That up to now on testing, the government simply didn't get it right.
The UK was also slow to roll out quarantines and social distancing. And Britons, even this weekend, were still going out to parks despite warnings and orders. Now experts say the UK could end up being one of the hardest hit countries in Europe, with models predicting possibly tens of thousands of deaths. Lester?
All right, Richard, thank you. And for all the efforts to mitigate the pandemic, staying at home, social distancing, hand washing, The lasting solution will be a safe, effective, and readily available vaccine. We know that remedy is perhaps a year or more away, but scientists around the world have mobilized and banded together in an intense all-around race to find that silver bullet. Keir Simmons has more on the search for solutions.
Good evening, Lester. Joining you on Messenger from London. While governments around the world have been unable to say how long these lockdowns will last, how soon we'll all be able to get back to work and to our normal lives, scientists have been working at unprecedented speed in the search for an effective and safe coronavirus vaccine. As America braces for a coronavirus peak, leaving millions of people worrying about their lives, their health, and their jobs, scientists are cooperating like never before. An unprecedented race to beat a pandemic that has slowed the world down to a standstill.
If there's any silver lining about this horrible pandemic, this was it. The scientists willing to put aside their egos and do things in new ways.
From the US to Europe, Australia to China, the search for a vaccine is underway. At least 45 countries working hand in hand with the World Health Organization as part of its Solidarity Response Plan. A handful of hopeful vaccine candidates already moving into trial phases, now tested in animals and humans to assess their effectiveness. COVID-19 shares similarities with other viruses that attack the respiratory system. At Baylor College of Medicine in Texas, scientists are looking into repurposing an old SARS vaccine.
The hard part that takes so long is making certain that that vaccine works. It also takes time to show that that vaccine is safe.
Also building on a previous vaccine model, the UK's Oxford Jenner Institute is hoping to fast-track a potentially viable candidate.
We're using a vaccine type that has been in thousands of people before. This is going to be safe when we use it for this viral infection. We have a good idea of what type of immunity it produces.
NBC News has learned that the Jenner Institute is already teaming up with Massachusetts-based manufacturer MilliporeSigma to dramatically reduce production time once the vaccine is approved. Also getting attention, an innovative vaccine by Pittsburgh University School of Medicine, demonstrated to NBC News over video link. A promising new candidate, successfully tested in mice. The vaccine's agents delivered through a patch of small needles in one dose. You're trying to create a vaccine that could be distributed to billions as quickly as possible.
This vaccine is very stable at room temperature and can be shipped in boxes just like Band-Aids and distributed globally for much less expense.
Alongside these clinical advances, the federal government is co-investing millions of dollars to scale up development and production with the private sector. Johnson & Johnson's CEO, Alex Gorsky, talking to Savannah last week.
We've got the production capabilities to be able to ramp up production of this in a relatively short period of time so that it can become available.
Vaccines are key to stop the global pandemic, but some experts warn that beating a 12 to 18-month timeline for a coronavirus vaccine is optimistic.
The vaccine is going to be the game changer.
America may have to get back to work before our scientists find an effective vaccine. That will mean months, maybe years of vigilance. And Lester, until vaccines are available, there is an urgent need for treatments to help ease symptoms and even help cure those affected by this deadly virus. Experts told us those kinds of treatments could come within months. Lester?
Well, the world is cheering them on. All right, Keir, thank you. As we focus on facts over fear, I want to introduce our panel of experts. They'll be answering your questions throughout the hour about the challenges facing us all as this pandemic spreads. NBC News medical correspondent Dr. John Torres is with us, virologist, epidemiologist, and NBC News science contributor Joseph Fair, senior business correspondent Stephanie Rule, and investigative and consumer correspondent Vicky Nguyen. Good to have all of you here. A lot of questions from folks. Joseph, let me start with you. This one came from a Lori on Facebook who asked, how many people have been given hydroxychloroquine and it either did or didn't work?
Well, the truth is we don't know how many people total have been given hydroxychloroquine for COVID-19. When we talk about hydroxychloroquine and its potential success, we're talking about published clinical trials, and there's at least 3 of those that we know about. China, France, and one here in the United States. They involved a very small group of people. And usually what we do with FDA trials is that we have a little bit larger group of people in what we call randomized clinical trials. So those have yet to go on for hydroxychloroquine with COVID-19, even though it has been produced under what's, not produced, but been approved under what's called emergency use authorization. So physicians can actually prescribe it for COVID-19 under that authority. That being said, whether they get the data back to the FDA and the people that need it, that's what's going to tell us whether the drug is effective or not.
Yeah, it's getting a lot of attention. Joseph, thanks. This is for Dr. Torres. John, Carmen asked via Instagram, does the virus run its course in 14 days, or is an infected person essentially a carrier for life? We apparently lost John's mic there. We'll get that back. In the meantime, let me switch to Vicky. We've got a question for you on Instagram. Meg wants to know, how concerned do we need to be about currency? Do I need to be cleaning bills by spraying them with Lysol or wiping them down?
Meg, I understand your concern, but I don't want you to be overly worried about this. A recent study published in the New England Journal of Medicine found the coronavirus can survive on cardboard for up to 24 hours. It has not been studied for how long it can survive on cash. The best thing you can do is train yourself not to touch your eyes, your nose, or your mouth, and always wash your hands after handling money. The other thing is consider using a credit card whenever you can. Use that chip reader that you control, or some smartphones have payment systems that you can enter that are contactless.
All right, Vicky, thanks. Let's go back to Dr. Torres. You were either speaking really, really softly or your mic was up, and I'm told we've got it back. So back to that question, does the virus run its course in 14 days, or is an infected person a carrier for life?
Right.
And Lester, hopefully this works better, but that 14-day period they're talking about is usually the incubation period. That's the time from when the virus gets in your body to you start developing symptoms. And for most people, that's between 5 and 12 days when that happens. As far as getting sick, when you get sick, if it's mild to moderate symptoms, people recover in about 2 weeks. If it's more severe or critical symptoms, it could be up to 6 weeks later. But once you do recover, your immunity builds up, and so you're not a carrier for this disease after that, and you're actually going to be immune from it for a limited period of time. We think maybe up to a year and maybe possibly longer. But again, you're not going to be a carrier of this. You're going to actually have some immunity to it. But for most people, about 2 weeks to run through the disease, maybe 6 if you're very, very sick.
All right, let me turn to this question from Dean on Instagram, who wants to know, how long have we known animals and probably people's pets can get the virus and potentially spread it? Joseph Fair, what do you think? We heard the story about the tiger in the Bronx.
Yeah, well, we've known for about a month at least that there was a dog in Hong Kong that was infected from its owner, and we knew at least that the dog got the virus. We did not know from that point onwards if the dog could then transmit the virus onwards. So we've heard about the tigers today. It's not uncommon, all I say is this, it's not uncommon for zoonotic viruses or viruses that come from animals into people that we can also transmit those viruses back into the animals. So a lot of the viruses that we may think of as just human viruses, we can pass those on to other animal species. Usually the more closely related they are to us, the easier that is, but in the case of even cats and dogs, sometimes we can transmit those viruses onto them.
All right, Joseph, thanks. When we come back after a break, on the front lines with a hospital nurse putting a human face on this crisis like no other. And later, remembering some of the fallen, the human stories behind these grim numbers of this pandemic.
NBC News special report, Coronavirus Pandemic, is a collaboration with our sponsor, the Facebook Company.
Was that a pivotal historical moment we just went stumbling past? Well, here we are, dancing in the rumbling dark. So come a little closer, give me something to grasp. Give me your beautiful, crumbling heart. We're working every dread day that is given us, Feeling like the person people meet really isn't us. Like we're gonna buckle underneath the trouble. Like any minute now, the struggle's gonna finish us. And then we smile at all our friends. Even when I'm weak and I'm breaking, I start weeping at the train station, 'cause I can see your faces. There is so much peace to be found in people's faces. I love people's faces.
This week, discover why everyone loves Wednesday's most watched dramas.
You know what this is about. You don't want to go there. No, I want to end this.
This is a protest. We're not moving. How we can't get out there again and blow up in our face.
Cruz is hurt!
She's the daughter of one of the richest men. I think you know who took your daughter.
You have no right to talk to me like this.
An all-new Chicago Wednesday on NBC.
The point of Songland is that unknown writers come on the show and walk away as professional songwriters.
You're one of us. You're totally one of us.
Oh my God.
It's undeniable.
She is teaching her son to speak Uyghur.
Xitoy hukumininki o'qiyotgan siyosatlari madaniyat jihatdan emas, muhit bo'lsin, asorat qilgan yo'qotish, o'ylarning. Biz har bir Uyg'ur oilasininki shirinlik o'qib. Kichik bir detallarga kirib kelyapti.
I did 3 years.
I'm in America, and the breadwinner arrives home from a long day at work. Now the family can sit down at the table, where everyone knows to be mindful of their manners.
It seems that heroes emerge from every crisis, and this one is no exception. Long after this pandemic has subsided, we will remember the selfless courage and dedication of those on the front lines, the healthcare workers who risk their personal safety for the well-being of all of us. Dateline's Andrea Canning has the story of one of them, a nurse at a New Jersey hospital just across the river from New York City.
Her day begins before dawn. And then it's a short drive to the front lines of a national crisis.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Today we have 17 patients, 16 vents.
Arlene Van Dyke is a critical care nurse at Holy Name Medical Center in Teaneck, New Jersey. This hospital is straining to care for 182 infected patients. The hospital and its cameraman, Jeff Rohde, are sharing a rare glimpse inside their embattled ICU, where Arlene begins her mornings gearing up to fight an invisible but relentless enemy.
Darlene, it's your nurse today.
Urging the sickest COVID-19 patients on ventilators to get better, to breathe on their own.
You keep fighting, doing everything we can for you.
Arlene has been at this for a month now. The nursing veteran thought she'd seen it all till this virus invaded her ward and her life.
Hey, Mom.
Hey, Nick.
When she finally comes home for the night, there's always a new story to tell her son Nick. Today, the task was huge.
We had to move all of our patients from our ICU to another area. It's called the Shell. We moved them all there so that we're all like in one central area. It's better for staffing. It's safer for patients and the nurses.
Then, after a quick shower upstairs, she reflects a bit more, recording with her iPad.
When you're wearing full personal protective equipment, a very tight mask, it's very difficult to breathe. Today, one of our nurses got affected by that and almost passed out. So, today was just draining.
Even when savoring a victory, Arlene finds it hard to hold back the tears.
Today was the first day that we were able to move one of our patients out of the intensive care unit. I may be teary-eyed, but I'm so full of happiness.
But one day's victory can turn into another day's tragedy.
Today was a very hard day for all of us at Holy Name. I cried the whole way home.
Last Friday night, her tears were for Jesus Villaluz, a 75-year-old transporter who ferried patients from room to room for 27 years.
Such a hard, dedicated worker. Always smiling. Always polite, never complaining.
Until he fell sick with the virus that infected the very patients he was trying to help.
Today we lost it. We lined the walls as he was taken away. That was a beautiful moment. Value everyone in your life. Cherish every moment and take nothing for granted.
To date, the hospital has lost 59 patients to this virus. And yet nurses like Arlene, doctors and support staff will continue around the clock here and in hospitals across the country as more of the sick are brought in, desperate for help.
That was Dateline's Andrea Canning reporting. And now fact over fear as we turn once again to our coronavirus crisis team for more answers to the questions that you've been sending us via Facebook and Instagram. Let's start with an update, if we can, on Senator Amy Klobuchar's husband, one of thousands of Americans who got sick with the coronavirus. He's doing much better now, but here's what the senator had to say today about what her husband, John, went through.
Well, when he seemed not always attuned to what that temperature was and that it was so high, when he started coughing up blood, I never heard anything like that with him before. When you detected the shortness of breath in our phone conversations, and then he ended up actually driving himself to the hospital because he didn't want to get anyone sick.
Dr. Torres, I feel like every day we hear a different symptom. Are those some of the symptoms that people should be looking out for, even coughing up blood?
Definitely, Lester. And we know the main symptoms are fever, that dry cough, that shortness of breath, but there's been some unique symptoms with coronavirus, anything from losing your sense of smell or taste to having headaches, even stomach aches. This is one unique one as well that happens not just with here, but with other pneumonias, and it happens for a few reasons. But in China, when they looked at patients, they found that 1% of them complained about this coughing up blood. It happens for a couple reasons. One, because you cough so violently that it causes a little bit of bleeding. But two, since it is a pneumonia from coronavirus, it could be damaging parts of the lung that could be bleeding as well. If you do notice this, you definitely want to call your healthcare provider to find out what's going on and where you need to progress from there.
I think so many of us are so hypersensitive now to our bodies, every twinge and scratch. Thank you, Dr. Torres. This is a question that comes from Esteban on Instagram. Are symptoms likely to just suddenly appear within the 2 to 14 days, or do they take time to develop? I'll throw that to both of you. Joseph, you want to take that first?
Actually, I'll let John take that one, but you know, they can vary is all I'll say is, and then John, please follow up more precisely than that.
And the big difference between, if you look at this compared to flu people talk about it coming on all of a sudden. It's like somebody flipped on a light switch and they went from feeling kind of under the weather to feeling really bad. This one is more indolent. It builds up more slowly, and people call it kind of a slow burn, where over about a 5 to 10 day period, you'll start with symptoms. All of a sudden, fevers will start spiking. Then you might feel better for 12 to 24 hours, and then all of a sudden, this will take off again, and your symptoms will really come out, and those symptoms will be a lot harder at that point. So again, this is kind of a slow buildup, not as fast as the flu, but it has more severe symptoms than the flu typically has.
All right, John. And the next for Joseph Fair, Vicky on Instagram asking, say a person had the virus, was asymptomatic, but was never tested. Is there a test that could determine that person had the virus?
So there is a test to determine if the person had the virus. That's what we call a serology or antibody test, and that's going to be a blood test. And that test is what's going to tell you if your body has indeed made antibodies to the virus, meaning you've recovered from it. Those are the people we're particularly interested in and talking a lot about right now, just because of the use of convalescent serum. And that convalescent serum or plasma is people that have recovered. They're producing antibodies which can actually literally help the person that's in the middle of the fight fight the infection themselves by taking it from that plasma and transferring it into that person's body. So it's almost like you're giving them extra ammunition to their immune system, allowing it to catch up.
So you're immune and you're helping others.
Absolutely. And so this test that I'm talking about, the antibody test, that'll tell you if you had it, and it'll also kind of give you a relative idea of how immune you are yourself to the virus itself.
All right, we are going to take a short break. We'll be back in a moment with a look at how this health crisis has created a food crisis for millions of Americans and how people are stepping up to help. And later, a helping hand for music makers in hard-hit New Orleans.
Of leaders.
Suicidal thoughts. Antidepressants can increase
by COVID-19 because they don't have income coming in.
The Salvation Army has given out thousands of dollars in aid. Ethan says in 2 weeks, the organization gave 64 families a total of $50,000. Just yesterday, the Salvation Army granted $12,000. Plus, there's 350 appointments set up for the next week. On top of that, many Nashvillians are staying home to social distance, something the Salvation Army is encouraging, but also hoping that those who feel like they're healthy enough to help will do so.
There is room for volunteer. We need people to help pack food boxes to deliver out to encampments for those who are living in tents, and we invite people to join us.
He says this is what Tennessee does, volunteering to help their neighbors in their time of need.
A 90-year-old woman survives her fight with COVID-19. Ana Fortunato is now urging people to keep fighting and to pray and stay out of bed. She lives on Long Island in New York and spent 2 weeks in the hospital. At one point, there was fear that she would not make it. Fortunato said her faith and natural-born toughness got her through.
Well, I'll tell them, keep on fighting, have that positive attitude, and pray and get out of bed. Don't stay in bed all the time. Even if you sit in a chair, you have to move a little. And I want to say to them, if I did it, you can do it.
Fortunato has asthma but is otherwise healthy. She's lived in her own apartment until about a year ago when she moved into an assisted living facility.
Erica Lugo. Together, we can stay active, stay healthy, reduce stress, and feel our best. Because the better we care for ourselves, the more we can care for each other. Let's work in together. Planet Fitness. United, we move.
Only your Steel dealer has the legendary tools to take on your to-do list. Real Steel.
C5G. It's like being there without being there.
Out. 170 chainsaw.
Well, you know and trust. You
And a law firm willing to go to trial. If not,
Claritin D. Claritin D improves nasal airflow.
Desperately needy Jew living in the former Soviet Union. You're
there. Visit KentuckyCourage.com or call 1-800-55-WILDCAT.
Fried pickles are back for a limited time. They're crispy, zesty, and delicious.
The chaos and the darkness. She lost her parents.
on NBC.
I'm Morgan Radford in New York. New data tonight shows that COVID-19 could be a ticking time bomb for communities of color, killing them at alarming and disproportionate rates. Here in New York, 59% of COVID deaths are concentrated in just 2 boroughs, both majority-minority communities. Similar statistics tonight coming out of Mississippi, where 50% of deaths in that state are African American. That number in Louisiana, 70%.
Wow.
One of the biggest factors, pre-existing conditions, things like heart disease, hypertension, diabetes, are not only overrepresented in communities of color, but they can also turn deadly when combined with COVID-19. That's why lawmakers from across the country are pressuring the CDC to release a race-based breakdown of their data. In the meantime, some cities are taking matters into their own hands. Places like Chicago, Milwaukee, not only releasing public service announcements, but in some cases creating a rapid response team just to make sure that their communities are getting the information they need.
NBC's Morgan Radford. The pandemic has triggered major challenges throughout everyday life and healthcare, the economy, and for millions of Americans, the ability to simply put food on the table. Cynthia McFadden reports now on how that challenge is being met.
Yesterday in Pittsburgh, a sobering sight. The National Guard passing out boxes of food to car after car of hungry Americans. Nearly 1,000 boxes distributed in just 3 hours. The nation's food crisis getting more acute by the day.
Wow.
In New York, they come on foot. City Harvest distributed nearly 3 million pounds of food in the last 2 weeks, with demand skyrocketing.
This is a perfect storm, a 50-state hurricane.
Over 1,200 cars lined up at this stadium in San Diego over the weekend.
When they see that box of food coming into the car, some of them smile and some of them cry.
Vince Hall runs one of the largest and most successful food banks in America, Feeding San Diego. He estimates they fed well over 100,000 people last week alone.
San Diego County has a population larger than 20 U.S. states. Almost half of them right now are dealing with some level of food insecurity.
He says demand is already up by 50% in some distribution spots, while food donations are plummeting.
We usually rescue about 12 million pounds of food per year from grocery stores across our county.
But not now.
Consumer demand has depleted those grocery stores.
In the last 10 days,
we have purchased 26 trucks full of food, which is more than we normally purchase in an entire year.
You might think there wouldn't be a hunger problem in Nebraska, part of the nation's breadbasket.
Roughly 250,000 people or so in the state of Nebraska are considered food insecure. That's before COVID-19. COVID-19 has exposed the food insecurity problem. It's also made it worse.
How much worse?
It's not unusual for twice as many people to come through the line than what we were able to provide food. In the month of March, we saw an approximate 50% drop in the amount of donated food that we received.
Their food costs are usually $73,000 a month, but last month they soared to over $675,000. Can they keep up?
We will not get to the point where we will run out of food. We won't be empty. We won't allow it.
Normally, back in Pittsburgh,
canned chicken, leek spinach. The vast majority of people these past several weeks are people who are newly unemployed and desperate for food.
They're helping a lot of people, and they don't realize how much it means to us.
And as in San Diego and Omaha, in Pittsburgh, they're now forced to buy massive amounts of food.
It's astounding. You've gone from spending about $600,000 in this same 2-month period last year to $1.7 million in the 2 months.
Yes, I'm concerned that we won't even be receiving all of that food.
Why? Because grocery stores or others outbid them.
Under the most extreme circumstances, you actually even have to close your doors.
It's what keeps me up at night. I'm sorry, I'm short of breath right now, just trying to imagine it.
What do they want the country to know?
We've got your back. We're not going to stop, and we're not going to leave anybody behind.
And here in Pittsburgh, of course, we're Mr. Rogers' neighborhood, so we are all about helping.
This isn't going to change overnight. This is a long haul.
It's emotional for you.
It so cliche, but I love being a Nebraskan. As I sit here and cry, we're tough people, and I want to do what I can to help my own because they deserve it, because they've been put in a spot that they didn't ask for, and it's our business to help.
Tonight, millions of Americans grateful for that help. When Feeding America surveyed its 200 food banks around the country last week, they determined that the increase in need was greater than 60% on average. Lester.
Yeah, an important need. All right, Cynthia, thank you. And as we continue to focus on fact over fear, I want to once again turn to our crisis team of experts. This one is for Vicky Wynn. Nina on Facebook wants to know, I've been using Lysol to disinfect everything I bring into the home, but what about items that go into the refrigerator and freezer? Can the virus last longer in frozen conditions?
Nina, research into COVID-19 is ongoing, but a 2010 study by the American Society of Microbiologists looked at the SARS coronavirus, which is very closely related to this COVID-19. And the scientists found that that virus could absolutely survive refrigerator temperatures. In fact, it could survive being frozen as well. So it's good you're taking those maximum precautions. If you can't wipe down those items, give them a rinse under warm water before putting them away. And always wash your hands after handling any of those packages.
All right, Vicky, thanks. Another question for Dr. Torres. This comes from Susan on Facebook, who asks, what about asthma and COVID-19? Is there a greater risk of serious illness or needing a ventilator?
So, Lester, with COVID-19, the conditions we worry about are age, because as we get up in age, especially above 80, it can be really devastating for them, but also pre-existing conditions. And that means chronic lung conditions are one of them. Asthma certainly falls under that. So if somebody has asthma, for their age group, it's going to put them at a much higher risk of not getting coronavirus, but of having consequences because of coronavirus. So they need to be extra careful and really do those things we know that can hopefully keep them away from getting the disease.
Yeah, John, this one is for both you and Joseph Fair. Comes from Grant on Facebook, who asks, where exactly are we with treatments so far? Is the FDA prepared to expedite the approval of successful treatments? Joseph?
I can speak to the one I started with earlier, the convalescent serum treatment, and that is expedited and is already being used under emergency use authorization. So taking serum from someone known to have recovered from COVID-19, known to already be producing those protective or what we call neutralizing antibodies, and then taking that serum, purifying it into the plasma, and then transferring that plasma to someone else. So that's already been fast-tracked, as well as a few other drug trials that are ongoing right now for COVID-19 placements, for COVID-19 patients around the country.
John, you want to add anything there?
Right, and there's basically, you can think of it as three different categories. One are the convalescent serum, which they're using right now for emergency basis, and they're looking pretty close to approval for that. The other ones are the medicines, the hydroxychloroquine, the remdesivir, which are probably a few months away from getting FDA approval. And then the final treatment is the one we're all really waiting for, the vaccine. That's 12 to 18 months. That's going to be the big game changer for this whole thing.
All right, John, thanks. Still to come tonight, lives well lived, remembering just some of the thousands of Americans lost to this pandemic. And after the break, how to keep the music playing down in New Orleans.
Little things can become your big moment.
Stitch is the easiest way to hem, mend, and fix your clothes ever. Just spring.
So if they need something, we have it. If Louisiana needs something, we have it. Same thing with Michigan, same thing with Illinois. There are certain spots that are very hot. And we'll see what happens, but we'll know pretty much we'll have time, and we'll be able to move it. In addition to the 8,675 ventilators, we have 2,200 arriving on April 13th. We have 5,500 arriving on May 4th. These are ones that we're building for the most part. And we have, as you know, great companies building them. Ford, General Motors, GE. We have really some great companies that are doing it. On May 18th, we have 12,000. On June 1st, we have 20,000. On June 29th, we have 60,000 ventilators coming. 60. So we have a total of 110,000 ventilators coming over a short period of time. I don't think we'll need them. Hopefully we won't need them. I don't think we'll need anywhere near them. But we'll have them for the future, and we'll also be able to help other countries who are desperate for ventilators. The UK called today, and they wanted to know would it be possible to get 200, and we're going to work it out. We got to work it out. They've been great partners, United Kingdom, and we're going to work it out for them. So they wanted 200. They needed them desperately. We now have 10 drugs in active trials, with 15 more soon to follow, as well as 2 vaccine candidates in active clinical trials. We'll do whatever it takes to secure needed medical supplies and bring more production of essential medicines back to our shores. We're doing that. We're bringing them back to our shores. A lot of these companies, they went a little bit haywire. They went away from this great country and they had them produced elsewhere. So we're going to start bringing them back. I've been talking about that for a long time, not only with medical, but lots of other things. America continues to perform more tests than any other nation in the world, and I think that's probably why we have more cases. Because when you look at some of these very large countries, I know for a fact that they have far more cases than we do, but they don't report them. We've performed 1.87 million tests to date, so that's 1,870,000 million tests. Think of that, 1,870,000 tests to date. And now we're performing them at a level that nobody's ever seen before. As we announced yesterday, CVS testing sites in Georgia and Rhode Island will be using Abbott Labs rapid 5-minute tests. We're down to now 5 minutes. It's a 5-minute test so that people can get the results back very quickly. And we're actively engaging on the problem of increased impacts. This is a real problem, and it's showing up very strongly in our data on the African American community. And we're doing everything in our power to address this challenge. It's a tremendous challenge. It's terrible. And provide support to African American citizens of this country who are going through a lot. But it's been disproportional. They're getting hit very, very hard. In fact, while we have Tony here, I'd like to maybe have you come up and address that one, and then I'll continue. But if you could address that, it would be great, Tony, please.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. President. We have a particularly difficult problem of an exacerbation of a health disparity. We've known literally forever that diseases like diabetes, hypertension, obesity, and asthma are disproportionately afflicting the minority populations, particularly the African Americans. Unfortunately, when you look at the predisposing conditions that lead to a bad outcome with coronavirus, the things that get people into ICUs that require intubation and often lead to death, they are just those very comorbidities that are unfortunately disproportionately prevalent in the African American population. So we're very concerned about that. It's very sad. It's nothing we can do about it right now except to try and give them the best possible care to avoid those complications. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Tony, I think you're going to have some pretty accurate numbers over the next few days, right? But they are they're very nasty numbers, terrible numbers. In total, 1,200
and that developed into some backaches, and that was the worst of it for me. I never really felt very feverish, had chills, sweats at times.
Of resiliency hopes to one day have music fill the streets again.
It's going to be a tough few weeks. We've lost already some legends in town. The loss of Ellis Marsalis was a big one, but I think we're going to come out and figure out ways to make the community stronger.
And there is late word tonight that a major figure in American music has lost his battle with the coronavirus. John Prine, a beloved and influential singer-songwriter with a keen eye for the human condition and an extraordinary catalog of dozens of albums going back decades. He died today in Nashville at the age of 73. John Prine was one of thousands who have succumbed to the pandemic, of course, and sadly there are likely to be thousands more. As the toll mounts daily, we must not forget that every one of them is a precious, irreplaceable human life lost. Our Kate Snow has a remembrance of some of those lives well lived.
You know that saying, he'd light up a room? That was Mount Sinai Assistant Nursing Manager Caius Kelly.
He knew what to say and how to say it, and would give you a hug afterwards. And it was just fun. You loved having him in the space that you were in.
He moved to New York to dance. His second chapter was nursing.
I remember him saying, I want to help people. Just want to help people. And he did. And he did.
DJ Black and Mild was one of the hottest DJs in New Orleans.
It sounds like he gave a big break to a lot of people.
He did. You know, he saw potential in a lot of artists, and he decided to just give them their chance.
But that wasn't his whole identity. His real name was Oliver Stokes.
I married Oliver Stokes Jr. That's who I married. He was my best friend. There's no other love that I can imagine, because he was that one. There's no one that can replace him.
Then there's Principal Desanne Romaine. Here, putting on a fashion show for her students, Brooklyn Democracy Academy offers a new start for kids who've fallen behind.
Desanne dared her students to dream without limitations.
Students like Judith Atongi.
She has taught me that the value that I'm never alone in whatever I do.
The kind of principal who would buy a student a prom dress and do her hair.
It was really an honor to be a student and friend. I cannot say thank you enough. Rest in peace, Miss Rose.
If you passed through Vail, Colorado in the past few decades, you might have seen Rod Powell at work. He played at Pepe's Bar 6 days a week, 2 shows a night for more than 30 years.
People grew up with Rod and got married and went and took their fiancé to see Rod and then brought their kids to see Rod.
He dedicated himself to the Make-A-Wish Foundation while mentoring fellow musicians.
Everybody you talk to in Vail is going to tell you the same thing. You know, that they're going to miss that laugh and that smile and that joke.
It's the sad time of the night.
Captain Douglas Lynn Hickok was a physician's assistant who joined the National Guard when he was 47. Last summer, he took his daughter, Chandrea, on a cross-country journey. He loved road trips.
He'd text us oh, almost there, get ready, I'm taking you somewhere. He would just go for a drive, go to the beach, go to a museum, go to a park.
His sister Mary remembers Sundays as a family.
Every week we had a tradition as a family to spend time together. We'd turn off the phone and we would have family activities, and Doug always made it fun.
It's good advice for other families right now to appreciate those moments.
Yeah, if you're going to plug into anything, plug into your family, because they're all that matters. Family is all that matters, and love. And the last words we said to my brother was that we loved him and we always would, and that we would be okay.
Reminder of what's important in the midst of one of the greatest challenges we've ever faced. That's our program for tonight. For all of us at NBC News, thank you for joining us. I'm Lester Holt in New York. Please take care of yourselves and each other. Good night.
We're definitely living in unusual times right now, that people need to take time to search their souls. They need to prioritize the things that they have taken for granted, including myself, towards understanding that even as the scriptures reads, that if a man gaineth the whole world but loses his soul, what has he gained? What has she gained? If you go throughout your whole life
and you don't have no friends and you lose your soul. The Bible says that it would have been better if that person had never been born. Once more, coming from the Windmill Ministries, our hearts goes out to the victims of those who are being victimized by this corona COVID-19 disease. The only thing that we can say is that we hope and pray for those that does pass, that they have had a relationship with God, they have accepted Jesus as their Lord and Savior, and that they will enter beyond this life into a better life. We just pray for a revival, and that we will see peace and utopia fall upon the society before the end of time or before the opening of the second seal. Good luck to all of us. And we can't say it enough. Shalom. And may God be with us all. And may God bless America. Thank you. A while ago I was doing some tech work up at the Baptist Church in between Sedonia and Sharon, Tennessee on Highway 89 here in Northwest Tennessee. And a sheriff's deputy was on his way home, and he seen my automobile sitting there in the parking lot, and he pulled up, not realizing who I was until he got close enough. Then he identified who I was. He goes, "Well, I was just concerned about you, wondering if you was doing all right." I go, "Yes, sir, officer, I appreciate you stopping." I go, "You try to stay safe and remain healthy." And as soon as I mentioned the word healthy, I heard him say something in the order of that he just got through telling his kids that now, if there's ever been a time to pray, now is that time to pray. As he was leaving my presence going home. It was kind of unusual. It startled me at first because I thought maybe somebody had called in towards me sitting there at the parking lot. Because whenever I first come back here to Northwest Tennessee, there were so many people that took a disliking to me coming back here that if I would have been sitting in that same parking lot 4 or 5 years ago, somebody would have called the sheriff's department and reported that Juby Jackson was sitting in the parking lot between Sharon, Tennessee and Sidonia, Tennessee, to go down there and aggravate him and see what he's doing. That's how badly that they was hounding me whenever I first come back here to Northwest Tennessee. And Derek Coble and others can verify that that was what was actually going on. My brother and I was being taunted. We was being hunted. We was being stalked by the community by and large, or certain people in the community by and large. And the whole time they was trying to turn it and twist it around like I was the one that was stalking them. It wasn't nothing uncommon. Out of 10 cars that I met, 8 of them would shoot me a bird. Now that's limited to about 1 out of 10 now. A matter of fact, a white truck, Chevrolet truck, drove by here today. First it was a black SUV, Tahoe. I don't know whose that was. May have been somebody that I no, somebody just snooping around, nosing around, seeing what my place looks like. But there was a white extended cab truck drove by real slow, and I could tell whoever it was. I just had that sense of spirit, just ignore them and go back into the building. And as I did, I looked over my shoulder, and sure enough, they was flipping me a bird driving by my property. So the birds being thrown at me has diminished to some degree. Instead of 8 out of 10 vehicles, now I'm getting about 1 out of 10 vehicles now that's still shooting birds and blaming me for their own problems, and blaming me for the injustice in the world, and blaming me for coming back here towards wanting to help them. And it's just idiotic behavior. And I guess that's one reason why I was skeptical whenever the sheriff deputy drove up to me this afternoon. It was already dark. And I'm like, well, did somebody call? Is there a problem? Oh, no, Juby. Just seen you out here, just wondering if everything was okay. So then I realized that it was a good Samaritan that was trying to do a good deed. And then my whole demeanor changed pertaining to the officer. You know, once you get picked on, slapped on, beat on, that's what you tend to expect out of society. After you get spit on, violated, after you've been demonized and dehumanized for a certain length of time, you expect that. And whenever you don't get that, you automatically raise a red flag like, uh-oh, what's wrong here? Oh, this is a different approach. Might be a setup. They might be up to something. And I hate to have that type of demeanor, especially on a program like this. But the fact of the matter is, I was attacked. I was attacked, and the law enforcement community here in Weakley County could have cared less what was going on at 291 Thompson Road or 430 Beech Grove Road, Sharon, Tennessee, zip code 38255. And I hate to be the bad news bearer in telling the truth, but if it looks like a duck, walks like a duck, quacks like a duck, odds are it's a duck. And that's exactly what happened to the Jackson estate here after I come back here in 2014. I had to basically live in about 5.5 to 6 years of nothing but hell. Nothing but pure, mere misery. That was either coming from the locals in Kenton, Tennessee, or coming from the locals in the Hopinians, or the Sidonians, or the people in Sharon, or the people in Kenton, or the people in Union City, or the people in Troy, or the people in Obion. That was what was going on. The people in Jackson, that was what was going on. And it's basically taken a pandemic to stop it. Because I couldn't get Tommy Moore, Tommy Thomas, Judge Pence, or none of the other ones to stop it for me. Or stop it for us. So it basically took a pandemic to stop this type of abuse. It is so sad in what is going on right now throughout the world. So sad. Shalom. Thank you for the special.